the MCAT Cars podcast, session number 50. The Cars section of the MCAT gives thousands of pre-meds nightmares every night. Whether you're an ESL student, lack confidence while reading, or a slow reader like me, Jack Westin and the medical school headquarters are here to help you score higher in every section so you can be confident you're ready to get the MCAT score of your dreams. Welcome to the MCAT Cars podcast. My name is Dr. Ryan Gray, your host here every week. As always, I am joined by Jack Westin from jackwestin.com. We're going to dive into our passage today right now. Jack Westin, back for hopefully what is another amazing, inspirational, educational MCAT Cars podcast episode. How are you today?
I'm good, and you bet. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting read, and it'll be fun.
Yeah, I glanced at it. I saw Pixar, and I'm super excited. So for you listening, when we record these, I don't pre-read these or try to figure out what's going on. Jack sends me the articles right before we hit record, and I just jump into it. So I read it for the first time as you are hearing it as well. But before we jump into our episode today, Jack, something I talk a lot about when I talk about Jack Westin and how awesome it is for students to help prepare for the Cars section, obviously just as one section, but preparing for Cars helps with every section, is I talk about the free Cars passages of the day. Can you explain why someone should go to jackwestin.com and click on that free Cars passage of the day?
Cars is one of the most difficult sections of any exam that a student will ever take, right? A pre-medical student will ever take. I think it's even harder than the board exams to some extent, right? Because it's all reading and it's all based on new information that you've never seen before. Whereas the other sections of the MCAT are based on science concepts that you've already studied. So you're more familiar with it, you're more comfortable with it. And that's where Cars becomes a problem. You're not familiar with it, you're not comfortable, and many students find reading a weakness, especially if you're a science related major student, or if math related or whatever. Usually you don't read as often in the past couple years as a pre-medical student, and you find it to be a weakness. That's where practice comes in, right? Gaining exposure to the style of this test. And unfortunately, the MCAT does not have a lot of MCAT Cars passages. They only have, about maybe 40 practice passages and before you actually start using their practice exams, and they don't even have that many practice exams. So what we've done is we've created a realistic MCAT passage for every day of the week. 365 passages with 5 to 7 questions each, which is what you would expect on the actual exam. We worked very, very hard, tirelessly, to make sure that it follows exactly with the guidelines of the MCAT. It's the passages that we've adapted and the questions we've created are questions that you're probably going to see on your test. Now, obviously, there are questions, they don't come from AMC, but we've really worked hard to model their style, their logic, their the frequency of certain question types, what their goals are. The passages really speak for themselves in terms of the quality. But the reason why you should really look at our passages over, AMC is because you could always use ours to practice with first before you actually get to the real deal. Yeah. I actually recommend doing a combination of ours as well as the AMC, just so you can kind of feel out both, and they will seem very similar in terms of the questions they ask. What we've done is actually we've focused more on creating questions that they're headed towards. So the Cars question packs, Cars question packs 1 and 2, which you should buy, they're from the AMC. Those are very important passages. Those are older passages. Those have been around for over 10 years now, about roughly. As the test progresses yearly and every decade, it changes in a very subtle way. And they become more engrossed in certain concepts, certain testing principles. And it's not easy to see that until you jump into their actual practice exams, which are more recent. So AAMC practice exam 1, 2, and 3 are the best resources you can use from the AMC. But normally you don't want to look at those until you're near the end of your studies and you're about to start practicing the actual exam stuff. So we've used those questions, those passages, we've really studied them to model our daily passages to something that you're going to see on the actual test. So I would say in terms of quality, in terms of what you're going to see on the actual exam, the very best are the AAMC practice exams. You should always use that to determine kind of where you are. But I would say the second best would actually be our passages, right? Our daily passages, our practice exam passages. But third best would actually be the CARS question packs, the AMC CARS question packs. So yes, the AMC stuff is the best, but the newer stuff, not the older stuff. The older stuff has very subtle differences in the way they ask questions, and the things that they look at. And what we try to do is model it based on the newer stuff. Yeah. So you'll see a lot of students say, well, I'm doing your passages and, I noticed that they're kind of different from the CARS question packs. Not really, because we also use the CARS question packs. But yes, we do use the actual practice exam kind of ideas and principles to make our questions. And that's why it's going to be a kind of a great jump into the actual exam passages if you work on them, if you practice them every day.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So what do we have in store for us today?
This is a very interesting passage. Nothing too crazy, but it's going to show you kind of how the author may suggest something but still kind of make you confused in a way. So, right. So like you won't know exactly where the author's going unless you know what to look for.
Okay.
So we'll talk about that.
All right. As we talked about last week, there potentially could be this bait and switch. So again, I'm ready walking into a potential trap, and I'll stay awake and see what's going on. All right, paragraph 1. A well-regarded Hollywood insider recently suggested that sequels can represent, quote, a sort of creative bankruptcy. All right, so we're dealing with a Hollywood insider, so movies or TV shows potentially, but sequels, mostly movies. And it sounds like the Hollywood insider doesn't like sequels. Creative bankruptcy doesn't sound very positive.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to know exactly what bankruptcy means, but it's obviously a bad thing.
Yeah.
And hopefully they'll explain it in a more clear manner as we read.
Okay. He was discussing Pixar, the legendary animation studio, and its avowed distaste for cheap spin-offs. All right, so now we're given Pixar. I think most people understand Pixar and know what Pixar is. Avowed distaste for cheap spin-offs. It sounds like the author is saying that Pixar does not like cheap spin-offs, a distaste for cheap spin-offs.
Okay, so that's where a lot of students get confused, right? Because it sounds like maybe they don't like it, but avowed is actually suggesting that they do. Ooh. Right? They like it, believe it or not. They like distasteful, cheap spin-offs.
Okay.
So, but look, if you didn't get that, that's okay. They should clear it up as you keep reading. Now, you mentioned what Pixar is. A lot of students may not know what Pixar is, right? Maybe they didn't grow up watching those films.
Yeah.
That's okay. There is a clause, right? It says, comma, the legendary animation studio, comma. Yep. If they want to, they can define it in a very quick clause, which they did here, yep. Right? They'll say something, comma, which means that they're defining it for you. They're explaining what you need to know from it, okay. Right? So that happens often on these kinds of passages. And that's where it comes down to not worrying about knowing it from the past. Like I said, you are not required to know things from the past. You just need to be able to learn on the spot, which is what CARS is all about and where practice can really help.
Okay. All right. More pointedly, he argued that if Pixar were only to make sequels, it would, quote, wither and die. All right. So the author is pointing to Pixar and sequels and saying, hey, if they only made sequels, they wouldn't last, wither and die.
That's it. You see, this explains exactly what you need to know now. It seemed confusing, right? But keep reading and it'll clear it up.
Yep. Just as a Pixar character once said, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. So brought it full circle.
There you go.
Now, all kinds of industry experts say all kinds of things. All right. So this is a very confusing sentence. All kinds of industry experts say all kinds of things. So I would probably just keep reading and see what their author is trying to tell me. But it is surely relevant that these observations were made by Ed Catmull, the president of Pixar, in his best-selling 2014 business leadership book. All right, so interesting paragraph. So we're introduced to this well-regarded Hollywood insider saying that sequels are this creative bankruptcy, and Pixar apparently likes to do these cheap spin-offs, which I'm assuming are they're calling sequels. And then at the very end, it's this little twist that the person saying these things is the president of Pixar in his book.
Right. What better, who better to support this idea than the actual president of the company, right? So the author really wants you to know, look, this is the point that some insider said, but even supported by the owner of, or the leader of this company. Now you made a very important point here. Cheap spinoff is similar to a sequel, but they're actually using a negative kind of connotation to sequels, right? So cheap, right, meaning kind of bad, right? In this, at least to the author's perspective, the author's perspective. Okay.
All right, paragraph 2. Yet here comes Cars 3 rolling into a theater near you this month. All right, so the author is pointing out that the president of Pixar is saying, hey, we shouldn't have these sequels. We're going to wither and die if that's all we make. And the author is saying, oh, but here's a sequel. And actually, the second sequel, right? Cars 3.
Right. So, it's kind of ironic, right? The president is suggesting that sequels will kill us, but then what? They're actually making sequels?
Yep.
So seems kind of off. Okay.
You may recall that the original Cars, released back in 2006, was widely judged to be the studio's worst film to date. Wow. I don't recall that.
I never liked it.
I loved Cars.
I never liked it.
It's probably because I'm a NASCAR fan. So I grew up a race car fan. So that's probably why I liked it. But it is what it is. All right. So we're given a date here, Cars, worst film to date. So that if I were to read into that, I would go, why are they making these cheap spinoffs of a movie that supposedly was really bad? All right. Cars 2, which followed 5 years later, was panned and even worse. All right. So we're given this picture of not very good movies, but they keep getting sequels. And if Cars 3 isn't disheartening enough, 2 of the 3 Pixar films in line after it are also sequels. The Incredibles 2 and Say It Ain't So, Toy Story 4. Oh, man. I don't know if I'd like this author. He's beating up on my beloved Pixar movies here. So Cars is apparently not a good franchise. Cars was not very good. Cars 2 not good. And Cars 3 hasn't been released as this article was written.
Okay, so what's the point of this paragraph? It's that they're still making sequels,
making lots of sequels. Yep.
Okay.
All right. Paragraph 3. The painful verdict is all but indisputable. The golden era of Pixar is over. All right, so now we're given a pretty blunt statement to the author's point of view, right? The golden era of Pixar is over.
Okay, and we could probably assume why, right? Like
too many sequels.
Too many sequels,
Yep.
Exactly. I've always thought about that. Why is there so many sequels to these cartoons?
It's a very easy answer, right? You got to keep the brand alive to sell the toys.
Yeah, That's so true. Star Wars, if you think about it,
Yeah.
sequel. Yeah, cool.
You know, it's very interesting, just random tangent here, right? Toy Story 4 was what, 24 years after the original, I think, roughly.
That's crazy.
And so when you think about it, right, the average age that people are having kids nowadays is later. It's about 28, I think is the latest I heard. But when you think about potentially a 10-year-old seeing Toy Story for the first time, 24 years later, now is 34. They want to take their kids to see the movie that they loved. And so these brands and activities are kind of rebooting because the parents want to take the kids to experience what they experienced as a kid.
I totally see that. Lion King, Aladdin. Yep. Right.
That's what it's all about. Right. Even things like baseball cards are coming back into style, because when I was a kid, baseball cards were everything. And now I'm a parent and I want my kids to love baseball cards too.
That's so cool. Yeah. And it brings us back to technology, right? So it's probably because the technology is going to be different when this generation will have a new means of looking at it through a new lens that we might not have had. So maybe that's another reason to make a sequel.
Yeah. All right. Cool. It was a 15-year run of unmatched commercial and creative excellence, beginning with Toy Story in 1995 and culminating with the extraordinary trifecta of WALL-E in 2008, Up in 2009, and Toy Story 3, yes, a sequel, but a great one, in 2010. All right, so the author, again, painting this picture of how good Pixar was and giving some examples of that. And,
this is confusing because it's saying Toy Story 3 was a great one.
Yep.
What?
Yeah.
I thought sequels were bad.
Yeah.
Why is the author saying that?
Well, you can't paint everything with a broad brush. You can't say all sequels are bad. So the author is saying, hey, Toy Story 3, even though it was a sequel, is still good.
And doesn't it make the author seem more reasonable?
Oh, it does, yeah.
Right? Like, okay, well, I agree some of these sequels were okay.
Yeah.
Right? So you're more likely to believe them. And that's what Cars is all about, believing the author. Right? When you answer these questions, you have to pretend you're the author. You have to pick what the author would pick.
Yep.
And that's why believing the author, listening to the author is so important. By the way, I really like Toy Story 3. I thought it was one of the best movies out there.
It's good. 4 is pretty good too. 3 is really good.
I've never seen it.
All right. Since then, other animation studios have made consistently better films. Right. So the author is now showing the competition here. The stop motion magicians at Leica have supplied such gems as Caroline and Kubo and the Two Strings. Leica makes some amazing movies, which are crazy. So an example of an animation studio and the films they're making. And in a stunning reversal, Walt Disney Animation Studios, adrift at the time of its 2006 acquisition of the then untouchable Pixar, has rebounded with such successes as Tangled, Wreck-It Ralph, Frozen, and Big Hero 6. All right, so all great films, I do say, if I do say so myself. All right, so just more examples of other animation studios making good movies. And Big Hero 6, for some who don't know, is not the sixth. It's not just the fifth sequel to Big Hero. That's just the name of it. That's a funny one. Okay. One need only look at this year's Oscars. 2 Disney movies, Zootopia and Moana, were nominated for Best Animated Feature, and Zootopia won. 2 great movies again. So again, other animation studios winning Best Animated Feature. Pixar's Finding Dory was shut out altogether. All right, so Finding Dory, again, a sequel to Finding Nemo, so not completely obvious. All right, so this paragraph is just a lot of examples of a discussion about Pixar and what they've made and how they're not creating good films and examples of the other animation studios making good movies.
Okay.
All right, paragraph 4. This thriving expansion of high-quality animated storytelling would not have been possible without Pixar. All right, so The author here is saying, hey, Pixar apparently is the trendsetter is not the right word, but the leader in this, and we wouldn't have all of these good animation studios if it wasn't for Pixar.
Right. And doesn't that sound confusing? Why is the author promoting Pixar now?
Yeah. You like him again, the author. He's like, okay, he likes Pixar, even though he doesn't think the movies are any good.
Right. Well, he's reminiscing, or he or she is reminiscing on Pixar from the past.
Yeah.
Right. How Pixar used to be great. Right.
Yep.
So it's still consistent. You have to just be careful with the way the author says it.
Yeah. The studio literally reinvented the genre with Toy Story, the first computer-generated 3D animated feature film. Which is crazy. You think Toy Story, that was only 24 years ago. That's the first ever computer-generated 3D animated film. But yeah, all right. So giving us the kind of the breadth of Pixar and what they did for the genre. Each subsequent Pixar release offered new feats of technical wizardry, from engineering the delicate trajectories of millions of individual strands of fur in 2001's Monsters, Inc., to capturing the wondrous interplay between light and water in 2003's Finding Nemo. All right, so this paragraph is really just talking about the technical feats of Pixar.
Yeah. Yeah, and these are great movies, by the way.
They're all great movies. All right, last paragraph here. Even as others gradually caught up with Pixar's visual artistry, the studio continued to tell stories of unparalleled depth and sophistication. All right, so again, more kind of praise on Pixar's past here is the author saying people were catching up to the technical side of things, how they were making these movies, but the storytelling was still unparalleled.
And I think that's what really separates them from everyone else.
1,000%.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was of course a podcast that I was listening to where it talked about, and it's not necessarily Pixar, it was Disney with Frozen, and just the number of drafts and iterations of that story and what was going to happen and how they were going to tell a story and how Anna and Elsa, how they related to each other. It's just amazing how these movies are made. So if you're into that kind of stuff, go find the history of Frozen.
Nice. Yeah, I definitely will. I've heard a lot about how Pixar's so focused on the story, and it really shows.
Yep. Pixar's signature achievement was to perfect a kind of crossover animated cinema that appealed equally to kids and adults. And I think they do that really well. So the author is saying, hey, this is animated movies, which a lot of people equate to kids' movies, but the author is saying that the writing works for adults as well. The key was managing to tell two stories at once, constructing a straightforward children's story atop a more complex moral and narrative architecture. So the author here is explaining this signature achievement that Pixar, the kind of two stories in one. Which is interesting. Up, for example, took a relatively conventional boys' adventure tale and harnessed it to a moving, thoroughly grown-up story of loss, grief, and renewal. Up was amazing. Okay, so again, so this is very interesting, right? So we have this bait and switch, right? The author's revving me up to not like the author. He hates Pixar, blah, blah, blah. But then if he finishes off, or she finishes off, talking about all the wonderful things that Pixar did.
That's why if you just read the first paragraph or two, you may not get the big picture, right?
Yeah.
The big picture is still that Pixar is done. That's still the idea.
Yep.
But the author's soft with Pixar.
Yeah.
Right? The author likes Pixar, right? So you have to keep in mind that even though the author doesn't like Pixar today, at least their direction, right? They still respect Pixar tremendously and what it's done for the industry, essentially.
Yeah. But this was written before Coco came out, and Coco was pretty amazing.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, is that a
It's a Pixar
sequel?
No, it's not.
That's probably why.
Yeah. Yep. So
but this last paragraph does something that a lot of MCAT passages do. And that's go into a new tangent, right? The tangent is the idea of the narration, right? And how they try to relate it to children and adults. That's not going to help us understand the big picture, right? Yeah. So you may also be confused because the author seems to be going off in this new direction here. But that's okay. That's going to happen. You just need to know it. If they ask a question about it, you know where they talked about it. And you also understand it, which is key.
Yeah.
Yeah,
all right.
That's great. And I was just thinking, with all these movies, there's always, based on this last paragraph, there is always this older authority, right? And this younger, naive kind of character. If you think about it, like with Monsters Inc., it was the monster, and I forgot the kid's name, but there's always this like playful kid and this adult trying to supervise, and they end up learning something about themselves through the kid.
Well, I tell this story all the time, right? It's the hero's journey, if you know what that is. It is exactly that. There is this young, naive person in the non-Pixar world. It's Luke Skywalker. It's Neo from The Matrix. And they have something happen to them, right? Luke's aunt and uncle die, or whatever happens there. And in Neo, he's gets sucked out of the Matrix, or into the Matrix, however you want to look at that. And they meet a mentor, right? Luke has Yoda, and Neo has Morpheus. Every story, almost every movie follows the same hero's journey. It's just different characters, different backstories, different storytelling, but it's the same story over and over and over again. And so I always bring this up when I'm talking about personal statements, because students are always like, well, aren't the admissions committees bored about hearing how my grandfather was sick, and so that's what made me want to be a doctor? I'm like, no, you just have to tell your story. And don't try to go, I'm going to be an amazing doctor because all of this clinical experience, right? That's the stuff that's super cliche and they get bored of. They want to know your story. Wow. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I'd have never thought about it that way at all. When you think of Toy Story, the adult is the toy, right? Yeah. It's like Woody is the mature one, right? Yep. So that's what I love about it. You could definitely change it up, make it new, even though it contains the same themes.
Yep. All right. So there you have it. Another great passage for you. Another great article breaking it down. Hopefully that was a fun one for you. And I hope you were able to listen, to read along, to use this podcast as an exercise to improve your reading comprehension, to improve your CAR score. If you are finding value in this podcast, my one question for you, my one ask for you is if you would share this with your pre-health advisor. Let them know, let him or her know that there are these amazing podcasts for pre-meds for free that they can recommend to their students. You can find all of our podcasts at mededmedia.com. Don't forget to go check out jackwestin.com as well to get more great CARS help, whether that's free passages in your email inbox every week or a CARS course, which Jack has periodically every month or so. You can sign up for a in-depth MCAT CARS course to help you on your journey. Don't forget to let Jack know when you sign up that you found out about him through this podcast and from Dr. Ryan Gray. Hope you have a great week. See you next time here on the MCAT CARS podcast.
This is MedEd Media.